It looks like we have about 10 people. That's close enough. Let's see if Sarah Simons is still with us. She has some obligations at the she's at the Republican National Convention right now in Washington. So if she drops, that's why. She has to go to the White House. So that's pretty cool. So, anyways, appreciate the patience from our from the university. We are a little bit behind schedule, but we'll see what we can do here. So you're up next. Uh, so, yeah, looking forward to hearing an update from the College of Agriculture.
Well, thank you, Chairman Boner, and also Chairman Hunt and members of the committee. I'm going to see if I can share a screen here. Having some issues with that for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why at this point. But I'm hoping that you did receive the handout that was able to provide to you last week, and also a copy of a spreadsheet that we had talking about our outlining our new hires over the last year. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And on the second slide, if you have that for our overview, the stakeholder support that we've received over the past year has been very critical for us to be able to provide resources to rebuild our college through a series of new hires that I'll show you a little bit later. Clearly, your support and Joint Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resources interim study that was conducted last year has paid dividends for us. So I'd like to thank you once again for members of your committee who were able to visit us last September, and for the opportunity I had to meet with the Joint Committee again last fall in Du Bois. I was also happy to be able to meet with a number of legislators over the past year at fairs and other venues, and be able to speak with individuals in person. And we clearly look forward to meeting with you all in person again very soon. So our focus of the presentation today is on bringing our college back to being on a solid footing. So we were able to garner a number of hires this year to meet our strategic objectives. And with this, we're able to rebuild our academic faculty, our extension staff, and other staff across the state at different centers. We were able to meet our legislative objectives from 2019 for the Wyoming State Veterinary Lab, the biocontainment facility, and for rodeo. So specifically, we were able to hire a clinical pathologist for the vet lab, and she's starting in 2 weeks, coming to us from Utah State. We were able to fill the director of the biosafety level 3-year biocontainment facility, and Dr. Case has joined us this month. And we're also able to fill all of the specified technician and administrative positions associated with the biocontainment facility. We've also been able to begin construction. It's partially completed for the horse boarding facility, but equally important is that the rodeo team is practicing and is going to be able to be on the road for state and regional competitions this fall. This is a major accomplishment for us based on the COVID situation here, and has required us to put forward some safety plans so that our teams can travel and compete. In addition to this, we have our livestock judging team who's going to be traveling across the region and country representing Wyoming, and we're looking forward to having opportunities for some of our other teams to travel as well. So as far as the Excellence in Agriculture Endowment Initiative and development of priority degrees, we have identified priority degrees, and I'll outline those in a couple minutes. These are all focusing on supporting Wyoming agriculture and rural community vitality and health. So these are two of the pillars of our strategic plan. Positions that we've moved forward with this last year and those that remain in our hiring priorities are focused on these priority degree areas that reach both Wyoming agriculture and community vitality and health. Our focus over the past year since I've been dean has been on leveraging state funds with other resources and also increasing our private fundraising. But in short, all of our activities this year have been tied to our strategic initiatives. So these include student success, which has been a bit of a challenge this year, as you might imagine, but we're very focused on our students being successful And even though we went all online this spring and we're still online for part of the fall, making sure that these students are engaged and they're getting the content and the experience that they need to be successful professionals. Wyoming Agriculture, again, with research and outreach activities, along with educational programs, community vitality and health, and then statewide engagement. We spent a lot of effort this past year on extension and extension programming and hiring plan for extension, moving that forward, and also with community college partnerships, specifically with Central Wyoming College with their MEETS program, and also with Sheridan College with the invasive plants initiative and plant science work there. Specifically with the Excellence in Agriculture Endowment Initiative, we've been able to make significant progress this year, and we appreciate the donor support that we've received from many individuals for the college. We've received major gifts from Jim Nyman and Nyman Enterprises, and also Farm Credit Services of America, plus a number of other donors, raising approximately $2.5 million since November of 2019. With the Agriculture Research and Excellence Funds, we've been focusing on this generous state matching fund program, realizing that it provides a major incentive to private giving on issues that are impacting Wyoming agriculture. One of those is the Ranch Management and Agricultural Leadership Program that's being launched through the gift from Farm Credit Services, expanded forestry offerings, the gift from Jim Nyman, and then animal science internships that are tied in with the rodeo program. So we do have proposals in place we're going to be presenting to potential donors for experiential learning opportunities in Sheridan that are going to be conducted in collaboration with Sheridan College student and faculty, and our cross-college interdisciplinary invasive plant species initiative, or Imagine, which we're moving forward to raise funds for. I'm very hopeful that the state matching program is going to survive the budget cuts, because these matching funds are critical to our college and for our ability to attract donors and to leverage their gifts. So moving forward, we do have strategic initiatives that we've garnered much support from our stakeholders for addressing their needs. One of the activities we had this last February was a major meeting of stakeholders to have them evaluate our strategic initiatives to see that these would resonate out in the community and to get their input into our hires and also into strategic plan. And I know a number of members from the legislature were able to attend that session, and we really appreciate your support. Did send a report out to all of the participants from that to get some additional input. We're working very closely to make sure that our priorities integrate with those of the university, particularly some of the new initiatives that Dr. Seidel has presented as he joined us as our new president in July. We're also very focused on making sure what we do conforms to the land grant mission, both in terms of budgeting and also with any hires that we do. So we actually rebuilt our budget from the ground up with assistance from the central administration this last year. And as we move into this period of high winds as far as resources go in the state, this is going to give us the opportunity to provide greater accountability, greater transparency, and more clarity, not just to our administration and board of trustees, but also to the legislature, as well as how we're allocating our funds and resources. We do believe now with the new budget that we have in place that we're positioned to make strategic decisions about programs at the faculty level and departmental level. And we want the ownership of the programs to be by the people that manage it. So this budget structure that we have will allow our faculty and department heads to be able to do that. We were able to increase our budget to cover the cost of new hires. This was about a 10% increase in our overall budget. And I'll show you the summary of the hires that we've made in later on in this presentation. With our hires, we did receive a great deal of support from the university administration, board of trustees, and the state, across the state, for hires in agriculture. You know, we were a little bit underwater here for a few years because of the budget cuts that went through in 2016. And we have been rebuilding our academic and faculty and staff, and we're about 1/3 of the way through our hiring plan effective this year. We are moving our extension hiring program forward, and we have been able to hire a bunch of folks, a lot of 4-H individuals out in the county, along with some educators as well. And then with the support from the legislature for our biocontainment facility and the Wyoming State Veterinary Lab. So at this point, those programs are fully staffed, and with our new director of the program in vet science, Dr. Jonathan Fox, I'm certain that we'll be able to have a greater service to our stakeholders overall. So we are forced to be managing resources better in this tough environment. And to face this challenge, we did redo our budget. We're very confident now in what we have to work with and how we are able to leverage our state resources to build successful programs. We have decentralized our budgeting process to make it possible for the people that are out there doing the job to understand what they have to work with, and to empower people to manage their programs and their budget. As far as our hiring program goes, we're definitely in a better place than we were in 2019. We've been able to make a number of strategic hires based upon priority degrees and programs. So by integrating President Seidel's initiatives into our strategic plan, we're ensuring that core competencies of our new hires must address both these initiatives and our college's long-term objectives. So when we get new folks in, that they're going to be on the same page. We're also too focused on hiring individuals that are going to support our college commitments to students and the community overall. So we have been able to rebuild teaching capacity in key areas. Rangeland resources. So we are building out a ranch management and agricultural leadership program based upon the expertise of our faculty and in ecosystem science and management, ag economics, and animal science. We've been able to add hires to our animal science program, our plant science program, and our programs in family and consumer science, which are so important to rural community vitality and health. We're also in the process of revamping our curriculum. So we started this last semester when we were moving forward with online education. So we're looking at forward-thinking approaches with eyes on improving efficiencies, increasing initiatives in distance education that will help improve opportunities, both career opportunities and just learning opportunities generally for Wyoming citizens. So these will include certificates, bachelor's and master's degree programs. We do have a 3-year hiring program in place for academic programs and also for extension. And I provided, I think, a short report earlier this summer on hiring that were, the progress that we'd had made through June. And then also that spreadsheet that sent in with the PowerPoint presentation on September 14th. The budget cuts are going to mean that we're likely to have to extend the timeline on our hiring plan out for another year, depending on the severity of the cuts and how these cuts are going to specifically impact our college. For extension, we are filling positions. We're evaluating the structure of extension based on what communities need and what communities want in light of some of these budget challenges we are going to be facing. But clearly, we're focused on seeking input from our local communities on these hires and doing the best that we can with the resources that we have in place.
And just real quick, Dean Rasco, just jump in there real quick with the budget cuts since you brought it up. Just a little bit more detail on that. When do you expect to have a more definitive plan as to how you're going to deal with that? What was College of Agriculture's proportion of the cuts going to be, and so on? Can you just maybe a little bit more detail on how this is going to affect the plan, what the timeline is until we know what all the effects are going to be?
Well, yes, sir. So what we don't actually, what they're not doing this year, and I really appreciate it because 2016 was not very strategic from a university standpoint. We have not been handed a budget cut specifically to the university, so we don't have there hasn't been an across the board cut announced. What we are proposing and what we're working with now is a scenario of a 10%, a 15%, and a 20% a budget cut over this biennium. If we're looking at simply a 10% cut, we're thinking we're going to be able to handle that with some of our reserves that we have, in addition to other funds we might have from unspent spending authority. But moving into 2021, July of 2021, with an additional 10% cut or possibly more, we're going to be looking at potentially some program consolidations, slowing the rolling out of our hiring plan, and maybe some greater collaborations with other colleges where we might be able to find some efficiencies. My focus has primarily been on raising revenue. I would rather see us increase revenue from, let's say, private sources, or from tuition or short courses or some other area than cut jobs. But we haven't been specifically handed a cut. We're every week going through different budget scenarios and various reviews at the university level and with our Dean's Council to see what we might be able to do. But as far as this fiscal year, I think we're going to be able to weather it just fine. July 2021 is going to be a harder time, and we just don't know what that looks like yet.
Appreciate that, and obviously something that we're going to be very interested in, given the history there, as we learn more about exactly how this is going to be rolled out across the university.
Yeah,
so anyways,
we will keep you posted with what happens here. I do appreciate, though, the approach that the university is taking to not just slash and burn everybody. If we're looking at a 20% cut, though, realistically, the university is going to have to restructure, have to do business in a completely different manner. And I'm sure that, we'll be impacted, but everybody will be impacted. One of the things that President Seidel has put forward, I think would be very good for higher education in this state, is to work more closely with integrating both our faculty and the community college faculty together as far as course delivery goes, and being able to build some greater collaborations there so that we can reach out to our citizens across the state. So I think that's something you're going to be hearing more from President Seidel about, and something I think is going to be very significant.
And just one more follow-up, and I appreciate that.
Sure.
When you talk about 10%, you're talking about 10% of your overall budget for the whole college, or just 10% cut to the block grant? And the distinction is significant. I think what we're talking about to the university is a 10% cut to the block grant, not the overall budget, which is, of course, it equates to about a 5 to 6%. If you cut 10% of the block grant, that equates to about 5 to 6% of the overall budget. So that 10% figure you're talking about, is that 10% to your entire college then, or is it just a portion of your fund?
It's 10% of the block grant. So we're looking at, depending on how they parse this out, if we took just a across the board cut, we'd be looking at somewhere between 2.3 and 2.7 million for this next year. And then we'd have that again for 2021, fiscal 2022. So it's just at this point, we just don't know what we're looking at, but we're putting together a number of scenarios. And I wish we knew, because our faculty and our stakeholders and our students are all very worried about this, and we just don't have good information yet. But
understand.
Again,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so anyway, with our hiring plan, I just want to get back to that a little bit here. So we are looking at continuing to hire. We have a couple people that we've brought on board this month, and we'll be bringing on board between now and the end of the year. So we don't have a hiring freeze, but what we sort of have here at the university is a hard frost. And the administration, particularly interim provost Alexander, has been very supportive of us at the college, and we have been able to move forward with hires. Most of our colleagues in other land-grant institutions across the region have been in a hiring freeze since probably April or May, and we're not in that scenario, and we're very appreciative of that. Just as far as the new faculty that we've been able to bring in for the last year, as far as teaching and research faculty, we're looking at 11 individuals that we've been able to bring on board. hired an extension specialist. We have our regional directors in place, Amanda Marney from Kansas State in the east and Richard Feutz in the west. We've hired extension educators, including one who's focused on our invasive species initiative out in Sheridan. And we've been able to hire 4 4-H specialists. On the Ag Experiment Station side, we've been able to bolster the leadership in SARIC with hiring Steve Paisley into that role, and with Scott Lake down here in the Laramie R&E Center. We've also been able to hire 2 farm managers and some technical staff into the Agriculture Experiment Station. For the veterinary, Wyoming State Veterinary Lab, we have hired that pathologist. She'll be starting in 2 weeks, and then 4 technicians. And then in the biocontainment facility, our director and then 2 staff. We've also been able to hire 2 teachers into the Early Childhood Education Center, and then also about 14 staff, which is a mix of research scientists, accountants, various types of administrative support personnel. When I came in last year, half of our departments did not have any support staff in their units, and so that was a very important objective for us to get forward. Move those hires forward, and we were able to do that.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Hello.
Go ahead. Yeah, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. In the extension area, were the counties involved when you were hiring these people?
Yes, absolutely. So we have county representatives on our search committees. So that's something that we do routinely. And we're gonna continue to do that, make sure that we have input from our local stakeholders. So if we are in a position where we're going to be looking at altering our hiring plan here, or having it roll out a little more slowly, what we definitely want to do, and we're planning on doing this fall under Kelly Crane's leadership, is to meet out in our counties across the state to ensure that the hires that we're putting into extension are ones that the communities really need, and we've got input from the communities on these hires.
Mr. Chairman, that's great to hear. Thank you.
So I'm done here. I know that we sent out 1 copy of this major spreadsheet, which shows the hires in addition to how they meet our strategic initiatives here and when they started. I didn't want to necessarily post that on the site here because some of that information is still a little bit confidential, but I did want the committee to have a complete list of where we were with the hires from the last budget from the last year. So I'm hoping that you've been able to see that document. And again, we were able in this last budget cycle to get about a 10% increase to our budget. So that was primarily going to support these new hires.
Yeah, it's all good news. Glad to hear that that's working out so far, and we'll continue to work hard to continue to support what you do at the College of Ag, and in turn, support you supporting Wyoming Agriculture. We'll continue that work. So, any questions or comments, committee? Senator Moniz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dean Rascal, have you hired a new animal science director yet, or where are you on?
We're currently doing that search. So we have 5 candidates that we're currently interviewing. We're hoping to be able to bring them in on campus. It's been very interesting because we hired a number of individuals, both faculty and staff, that had not been on campus, and they still took us up on our offers, and they moved to Laramie or Sheridan or wherever they're heading out to, and starting even without being able to meet with us in person. So I think that indicates that this institution is strong and people want to be here. We were even able to keep one of our faculty in vet science from taking an offer at my old alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, which is one of the top institutions in the country. She decided she was going to stay here because of her focus on wildlife disease. So this is a place to be. So
And then follow up, Mr. Chairman, as far as the BSL-3 lab goes, is it certified and up and running?
I'll tell you what, we've got all our staffing in place, as I mentioned. The federal government has not been traveling. So until the federal government, removes the travel ban on their professionals, we're not going to be able to do that final certification. So we were hoping that we would be able to get that done late this fall or early this spring, but until still the feds change their policy, we're not exactly sure when they're going to be out to do that certification step. But we do have all the equipment in, we do have all the staff, and we're ready to go.
Good, thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Okay, well, I appreciate the update and all of your hard work, Dean, to get the College of Agriculture where we all hope that it will be. It looks like you're making good progress, and we'll see what we can do to continue to help you, like I said, moving forward, considering all the challenges we're all facing. So thanks again for your work, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Well, thank you very much for your support.
Okay, committee, looks like it's 1 o'clock according to our agenda, only an hour behind schedule. So we'll go ahead and move to that Bureau. We'll transition to sort of our water development type topics. We have a representative from the Bureau of Reclamation who is here to talk to us now. So we have Carly Ronka, and please correct me if I mispronounce that name, but she'll talk to us about the Bureau of Reclamation, obviously an agency that has significant assets here in the state, and one that we're very interested in. So feel free to go ahead and get started here whenever you get a chance. Okay, Carly, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can now. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, loud and clear. And yeah, thanks for taking the time to meet with us remotely. Welcome to the Joint Agriculture Committee of the Wyoming Legislature. I look forward to any information you can provide about Bureau of Rec assets in the state of Wyoming.
Wonderful. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And I also have Mahanrai Williams joining me. He is part of my staff. He's the Resources Division manager, and he oversees things that are pertinent to our discussion today. So thank you again. And there were several topics that you wanted to hear about, and so I've prepared and kind of bunched them into three things. You wanted to have a kind of an overview understanding of reclamation and the transferred works irrigation districts, and specifically our relationship. Another thing you wanted to hear about was the O&M transferred works priorities. And the third thing was the title transfer process. So I'll just jump right into it if you're ready. And certainly as being a discussion, hopefully you'll just interrupt if you have questions as we go along. So kind of an introduction to Wyoming Area Office. We're part of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And our service area is east of the Continental Divide, except for the Keyhole Reservoir area up in the northeast section. And then we go down into the western portion of Nebraska along the North Platte River. And the projects that we have in Wyoming Area Office include 20 reservoirs, 11 operating power plants, and 3,800 miles of canals and laterals. So I want to point out that that is Wyoming Area Office. We also have 3 other area offices in the state of Wyoming. So those aren't part of my jurisdiction, but obviously we take up a bulk of the map. But in case, just to refresh your memories, there's the Snake River area office, the Provo area office, and the Dakotas area office also have representation in the state of Wyoming. So I'll limit my discussion today on what I know for Wyoming area office. And so essentially those facilities that I just mentioned, the vast majority of the reservoirs and all of the power plants are what we call reserved works. That means that Reclamation retains not only ownership, but also operations and maintenance responsibility. But when we look at the canals and the laterals and just a couple of the smaller dams in Wyoming area office, those have been transferred to irrigation districts for operations and maintenance. So Reclamation still owns them, but there's a contractual arrangement where the irrigation districts operate and maintain. So in the state of Wyoming, within Wyoming area office, there are 10 separate transferred works districts. And you'll recall from your meeting in June, you were provided a map and a spreadsheet that listed out all of those transferred works and the facilities to give you a point of reference there. So let me give you a big picture, kind of why did this relationship come to be, where we've got this partnership. So the federal government way back, in the early 1900s, Reclamation came in and worked with local communities who wanted to have water for their communities for growth. And the federal government had the financial resources to build these facilities. Obviously, it's a large capital outlay for that, and the smaller local communities didn't have those kind of funds all in one bulk amount. So in order, if a local community wanted it, there was this arrangement made where the government would come in and build these facilities. If there was a local desire, and then the local community would form in some way an irrigation district who would then over time repay the capital costs. And it was at 0 interest rate. And so we've got irrigation districts in Wyoming area office who are still repaying on that capital costs from way back when. However, I'll tell you that most of our districts have repaid those capital costs. We only have 3 out of the 10 that haven't. But so essentially you had these irrigation districts formed. They were local community based, and they wanted to be able to operate and maintain transferred facilities. So where we could transfer facilities for operation and maintenance, we did. And Reclamation retained those larger reservoirs and functions for that. So the mechanism to make that arrangement happen was way back. There were contracts. So we have contracts with each of our irrigation districts, but there's a general theme in all of them. So I'll just kind of highlight some of the things in terms of this general arrangement between Reclamation and the irrigation districts. So obviously the federal government built them. I already said that. We own them. The irrigation districts repay the capital costs until that debt is repaid. And they also operate and maintain the transferred works. And that is at their cost, no cost to the government, and they have to follow Reclamation law when they do it. On the other hand, Reclamation operates and maintains the reserved works. So we store and manage the movement of the water to get it to the irrigation districts. We obviously maintain the dams and those associated facilities. The irrigation districts do pay for their share of our operations and maintenance on those reserved works. So there's an allocation that's split out. Reclamation conducts inspections of the transferred works. And we also, I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get in the O&M portion, but we do come out and at no charge look at those. We also are a resource for the irrigation districts. You know, they call us often with just miscellaneous questions about facilities. We have a program in reclamation for operation and maintenance of canals, and so they're able to take advantage of some of those resources. Now, certainly if the technical assistance requires a substantial amount of time or study, they do have to reimburse us for our time there. But we assist them with various water operations, such as, you know, if there's something that they might need to do on the facilities, they'll ask us to alter the flows coming out of the reserved works to assist them. So we work with them on those kind of things. We also stand by their side if, for example, they've been challenged in a way, maybe by an agency where they need our help in answering some questions related to you know, the facility. And we also work through with the state engineer's office quite closely with the irrigation districts. And sometimes there's various agreements that are needed to help facilitate the district's O&M of the facilities. We also work with the districts to resolve land issues. And, you know, sometimes they have requests for land. That's all non-reimbursable. For example, there's, you know, with land being out there, sometimes there's trespass issues, sometimes there's easement issues. A lot of our districts like to manage grazing on reclamation lands. So we work through and come up with agreements for that. And then, you know, just general realty lands type of questions. So we're there for assistance. In terms of financial assistance, because we have this arrangement, we have the opportunity in some cases to provide financial assistance. One of the big ones is, depending upon funding availability within the Bureau of Reclamation, we have issued extraordinary maintenance contracts. And those are essentially a financial assistance arrangement where we can provide financial assistance and they can repay us over time. So that has been helpful in some instances where perhaps the district has an obligation to do replacement or repair, but it's a very large bill and they don't have the funding right offhand to pay that. So they would come to reclamation, and if we had the funding, we can enter into this kind of contract so that they can get their work done, but then have some time to repay that. And that's at fairly low interest rates for those.
And just if I could just jump in right
Sure.
there, how many of those loans, I guess, have you distributed in Wyoming in the past year or two? Can you just give us an idea of the scope of that program?
Sure. In the state of Wyoming, so the big one last year was Goshen Irrigation District for the collapse of tunnel number 2 and repairs of that. The issue there is they couldn't come up with that kind of funding that quickly, and it was an emergency. You know, crops were out in the field and they needed water. And so, of course, that's a shared responsibility with Gearing Fort Laramie Irrigation District. So after the districts figured out, you know, what do they want to do, they realized, wow, this is going to cost a lot of money and the contractor is ready to go. And they couldn't find funding that quickly. Thankfully, Reclamation was able to come up with $4 million within 2 weeks of them asking us for the money. We did it in a incremental. We did 2 million, and then a couple weeks later, when they needed another infusement, we were able to get another 2 million. I'm told by the district that money was critical to getting that contractor to stay working and make those repairs. So that's a big example. Obviously, we were under a time crunch. Another example within recent, within the last 2 or 3 years, we issued, I believe, about 6 or 7 extraordinary contracts for some work to the North Spillway Gate at Guernsey. So our North Platte districts needed to come up with their share for the O&M of that facility. And so we were able to issue contracts. Now, there were several districts that decided they were able to raise assessments and pay for it on their own, and that was their choice. The key that I'll mention there, and I keep saying it's if a funding is available, is we don't have a budget for extraordinary maintenance contracts to issue. So in the case where something isn't an emergency, we're able to, have a little bit of time to put that request in and see if the agency has the funding. In the case with Goshen, it was an emergency, and funds had to be scraped together very, very quickly. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, it helps give us a little idea. Senator Steinmetz, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Director Ronka. It's been a while. I'm glad you could join us today. Forgive me, it's been a while since we went over this, but when we've initially looked at all of this, there was something in the beginning called the Reclamation Fund that was supposed to keep our dams and our conveyances in operation should there be an emergency, and there was no money in that fund at the time. Has anything changed with regard to that is my first question. And then secondly, what has anything changed as far as with regards to the liability of the Bureau of Reclamation in these facilities that they hold title to? And then, and I think you'll probably be getting to this, what are the advantages and disadvantages of someone pursuing a title transfer, since it seems that the liability is on the district who has the O&M expense, but this was an extraordinary expense that no one could have anticipated. Also, you mentioned that you do inspections, and we had some trouble getting those inspections done. So I was wondering if that process has changed a bit, or how exactly that is handled. And so those are my questions to begin with. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think there's 4 questions in there. If you want to go ahead and give that a shot, Ms. Ronka.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Steinmetz, good to see you as well. So in terms of any change in the funding, so if we take a look at the funding overall, the funding picture is the same in terms of if a request were to come in for extraordinary maintenance, financial assistance, we would need to find the funding within the Bureau, but we don't have, at least in my office, a budget for that. In terms of the Reclamation Fund, let me just clarify that, and it's a little unfortunate because it shares our name. The Reclamation Fund is not directly affiliated with the Bureau of Reclamation. The Reclamation Fund takes in funding sources from federal land and timber sales across the Western states. It has to do with repayments from, some of our money goes in there in terms of or associated with reclamation, repayment of projects and water contracts and sales. Some funding goes in there from hydropower projects, but then there's also revenue from federal land leases. So there's several agencies who we collect revenue off the federal lands, and that revenue can go into the Reclamation Fund if it's specified to do that. That fund, though, is not designated to be used directly for the Bureau of Reclamation. Congress must appropriate funding from that fund if they want an agency to have it. So nothing has changed there. That's the same as it's been. Let's see, the liability question and the title transfer, you're right. I will get to that later. there is a clause, essentially in all of the contracts that indicates the district holds harmless the federal government for basically anything. I mean, anything with damage of O&M or anything like that. But if it's okay with you, the title transfer portion, I have a large amount of information, and I tried to organize it so you get the full picture with title transfer. So if it's okay with you. All right, so I'll deal with that later. The inspections, that is part of our O&M process, and I'll touch on that a little later, but I can address it kind of superficially now. In terms of the inspections that were done, after the tunnel failure, we did some initial inspections. We had to get back in. We took advantage of looking at the other 2 tunnels that are part of that system. But overall, we've been getting more and more organized with the irrigation districts to come up with a schedule so that, we have it planned out years in advance, and the districts knows it's coming. The thing that takes some time and effort is, for some of these facilities, they have to be dewatered to inspect them. So we've been working cooperatively with our irrigation districts to do that. So yes, we have been making improvements in that arena. Okay. Okay. So I was talking about extraordinary maintenance, and then in terms of financial assistance. So I think we covered that one. And then the other mention I would put out there is in terms of financial assistance for these irrigation districts. And they know, because we make sure they know when these funding opportunities are available. It's part of our Water Smart program. And there are several different programs within the Water Smart program and funding opportunities, and it varies from year to year. So we just keep our irrigation districts abreast of what's available for them, and if they choose to put in for funding. I'll tell you that for Wyoming area office irrigation districts, we've had a lot of districts that have benefited greatly from this program. So there's funding to be had, but it does take time for them to put in proposals. And but I do have staff that is available as a resource to help them, with their ideas. So that's what I had kind of in mind to cover for the relationship. Are there any other questions before I move on to O&M priorities?
Any questions, committee? I have one about the inspections. Can you just go into a little bit more detail about, what, I guess, how thorough those inspections are? Are they meant to kind of identify things like what happened in the Goshen Irrigation District before it happens? Just the level of detail there, and what, because that's one of our discussions we're having as a committee, is kind of compiling a list of the condition of all these works throughout the state, so we can begin to wrap our minds around the investment that may be necessary to make sure that they continue without these catastrophic failures. So any information you have about those inspections would be interesting to me.
Okay, very good, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of the inspection program, so that leads to the next topic. We go out on a periodic basis, and it depends on what kind of inspection we're doing. Some of them are annual for some districts that have it in their contract. Some of them are a little bit longer, but we get out there and take a look, and we're looking for the condition of the facilities. We look at the concrete, we look at the metal, we look at bridges, roads, everything that's been transferred, so that we can help identify actions that need to be taken to make sure these facilities operate into the future. Now, you mentioned the tunnels or the Fort Laramie Canal and the tunnel number 2. The thing with that is, there's things that you can see and there's things that you can't see. And the issue with there, and we've talked to the irrigation districts and others, and And in that case, you know, there concrete cracks, that happens. And we make notes of it. But in the case of what was going on there, nobody could detect that because, I mean, the voids were, at least our understanding of it, is there was internal erosion going on, and that couldn't be detected. Now, what I'll tell you is I submitted a proposal to see if there was any kind of science that could be created or technology to be able to detect that kind of thing. So our dam safety office and others in Denver are taking a look at that. But in the case of what went on there, that was a very unique situation.
So if I understand that correctly, that's basically a visual inspection. And in order to get at some of these issues, you have to do some sort of intrusive analysis. I believe what they ended up doing in Goshen was just, you know, drilling into the concrete and taking samples, you know, which obviously is going to be much more involved than just kind of a visual assessment. But I think the technology is out there. Maybe it's not easy or cheap, but there's certainly ways to kind of figure this out. And I think that's something that we're going to be grappling with on this committee as well. How's the best way to have these more, I guess, more detailed analyses? So Senator Steinmetz, you got a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was my understanding that they used the University of Wyoming's seismic tools to go in and inspect both of the tunnels. And so, and it was my understanding that you had some equipment like that and weren't quite sure where it was located at the time. Is that correct? Or do you not possess that kind of equipment through the Bureau of Reclamation?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, yes, we have that equipment. Our experience in the agency, as I'm told by the engineers who use that equipment, is it's not very reliable in the situations that were in the tunnels. So it wasn't necessarily something that was going to help, but the district did decide to work with the university and do it anyway. And it sounds like maybe they did get some valuable information. So that's what I think you're right. You know, the technology does exist, but but what I've been told in our agency from the experience is that it exists, but it's not reliable enough to make the big decisions that need to be made. But the intrusive, you know, obviously once the failure happened and that contractor came in, certainly there was the coring to see what was going on.
Follow up, Mr.
Senator
Chairman?
Steinmetz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, again, just help me clarify this because it's been a year since we've gone through this, but it was my understanding that it was off of that kind of equipment that you based the decision. You would not allow them to run water through Tunnel 1 based on that inspection, and you made us rib that one day before we were supposed to turn water on in that. So could you clarify that for me? Is that correct, or was there something else I'm missing?
Go ahead.
So there was a visual inspection, and there were actually, we were able to see through some of the cracks visually to see that there were large voids. Now, I do believe you're right that Goshen had some of that data available, but we actually saw the problem that had been forming also in tunnel number 1. And in terms of the recommendation in that case, you're right. Those were then issued as category 1 recommendations. And I'll get to that in a minute in terms of the priority, which means we felt that especially given what happened in tunnel number 2, and that tunnel number 1 was in a similar geology type area, that given all that information, we felt there was the possibility of imminent failure also of tunnel number 1. And so we asked the district to fix that before they ran water. And of course, that was in late fall, and they had their contractor finishing up in tunnel number 2, so they were able to move to tunnel number 1. But the district was able to move very quickly and did a great job of getting that done. And I believe they got it done in February, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, Senator Thomas, do you have another follow-up? Okay.
Just one more. So yes, I think so. And I guess to be clear, I was in tunnel 2 the very day that requirement was made, and they were moving the equipment out. So it was just by the skin of our teeth we got that done in time to run water. But thank you for that.
Okay, one more question for me just off the, before we move on here. With that seismic analysis, is there any risk of actually causing a failure if you're doing seismic analysis, if the infrastructure is in question, you're talking about a tunnel? Just a question maybe for an engineer, but I'm just wondering if there's any risk associated with that sort of analysis.
Well, since I have an engineer here with me, I may lean on Mr. Williams a little bit for this. The seismic analysis, are you speaking of the ground penetrating radar?
Well, just a little bit more information. My understanding of a seismic analysis, I guess, revolves around the oil field. Well, they'll actually send out, little shock waves into the ground to measure how long it takes to respond. So maybe just a little bit more information so I can learn a little something about it as to how that works.
Okay. Mahan, if we could help explain, the ground penetrating radar is non-invasive, but if you have a little bit more detail, because I know you understand how that test is conducted, and if you could help answer that.
My understanding, I thought that what the University of Wyoming had, and also what our staff was approached about, was actually the ground penetrating radar that uses radar waves versus the more intensive shock waves that would be used in the oil field. And so it is not it would not cause a shock on the facility using those radar waves. But the ground penetrating radar also has certain limitations in terms of depth of how far it can penetrate and what kind of results you get back from that. So each has its application. The seismic type shock wave is a different application than what we'd be looking at for these tunnels.
Okay, I think that's helpful. And that's that equipment resides with the university then, if I understand correctly.
That was my understanding.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just really quick, we're going to have to leave for our appointment at the White House, but I wanted to thank everyone, and I hope to review the rest of this information when we get back home. So thank you guys all so much, and we'll see you when we get back home.
Hey, thank you, Senator Steinmetz. I know you'll represent us well.
Thank you.
Okay, so we can go ahead and proceed, Ms. Ronka, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll go on to the O&M of the transferred works and the priorities. So we've been talking about these inspections, and what happens is during the inspections, Reclamation writes up recommendations. So if we find problems, we write them in a recommendation and we send the districts a report. Now, it's usually not a surprise because the districts are with us on these inspections, and there's a lot of discussion with them at that time. So it's together. But we prioritize the recommendations based on the urgency needed to address the recommendations. And there's 3 categories. Category 1 is the most urgent, and category 3 is the least urgent. Category 1 is recommendations that are so great in importance and urgency to take the remedial action because there's essentially could be imminent risk of failure. Usually the time needed to make that correction is very short, so the district needs to act quickly. versus category 2, it's still important. These are important recommendations, but it's more in terms of an outlook of there's problems that are brewing or that we're seeing that is going to potentially cause further damage and either impair the facility or not let them operate because it's of that severity. So category 2 is kind of important, but not as urgent. And they have time. They have time to plan. They have time to find funding and to get those addressed. Versus category 3s are less important, and they're believed to be good best practices, but in general, they're not needed right away. So for our 10 irrigation districts that are in the state of Wyoming, within Wyoming Area Office, we have 76 category 2s on the books and 3 category 3 on the books. We have no category 1s on the books. The latest ones we've already talked about, and those have been addressed. So, we have no category 1s. Category 3s are less important. So I'm really going to focus on those category 2s for the rest of this. What I did is I pulled out of those 76, we try to assign or come up with some rough preliminary cost estimates with the districts, and we take note of that. And so we pulled that for you today in case it helps you. Those 76 category 2 recommendations total roughly $6.5 million. But let me say that does not include the costs that are going to still be needed for the permanent repairs of tunnels number 1 and 2 for Goshen, because they're still coming up with those costs. So, of course, many of the irrigation districts go to Wyoming Water Development Office to help with funding. And so, I offer that as, I don't know if that helps you or not, but that's what it looks like in terms of what these districts are up against in terms of operations and maintenance recommendations. Now, some of them are planned for completion as early as this year, and some of them are planned out. The furthest one we have is 10 years from now, 2030. So, so it gives you a sense of that planning horizon. But just realize that every year, we go out and we're writing more and more recommendations, of course. I mean, it would be great if they didn't, but the reality is the facilities are getting older. So the vast majority of the recommendations focus on the repair and replacement of concrete, which a lot of the districts have that technical expertise in-house. But it depends on the scale of the project, whether they could actually do it or whether they need to hire a contractor. But we also have recommendations on sealing of conduits, repair and recoating of metal, removal of vegetation, removal of sediment deposits, and other repairs like to valves, roads, buildings, things of that nature. Now, what I want to point out is that many of our irrigation districts are very proactive, and they're actually fixing things before they get to a level of us writing a recommendation. They already know that something has exceeded its life cycle, and so they're already taking care of things. So I just want to caution that $6.5 million doesn't represent the full scope of what the irrigation districts are doing. And to provide you possibly with that rest of the picture, many of our irrigation districts have filed master plans with the Wyoming Water Development Office. I think there's only a couple that haven't, but in there, it might give you a better perspective. We did a quick tap, and there were several millions of dollars of work that they identified in their master plans. So that's what I have on the priorities. Are there any other questions on that?
Any questions, committee? Okay, don't see any. So go ahead and continue.
Okay. So my last topic is to give you kind of an overview of the title transfer process. And I know that you already have our directives and standards from June. So I won't go verbatim. I'll try to give a high level summary and then give you some targeted areas where we're thinking about, and maybe it would help as you deliberate on the topic as well. So we've had title transfer available for a while, and essentially what that means is if a district wants to come in and go beyond operations and maintenance transfer, and they actually want to own the facility, there's a process to make that happen. And the update, though, is in 2019, there was a new public law that was passed, and it's called the John D. Dingell Jr. Conservation Management and Recreation Act of March 12th, 2019. And that's Public Law 116-9. And in there, that gave Reclamation the general authority for title transfer. Previously, there was more of an involvement with Congress. And so it really, we believe it'll help to streamline, and I think that was the intent. So the first topic I'll cover is the eligibility, who can actually ask for title. I'll also summarize kind of the steps for title transfer, and then I'll give you kind of our perspective on pros and cons, and there could be more out there, but these are the ones that we've been thinking about. So in terms of eligibility, we're talking about two things here: eligibility of the facility. So the reserved works aren't eligible. It's pretty much got to be a transferred works to be eligible. And then the entity, which in most cases is already the operations and maintenance transferred works irrigation district. Now, I know that there's been some question about whether the state could actually ask for title transfer. And I don't have a firm answer for you on that, but if it's something that gains traction and you're interested in it and you actually want me to research and answer, I just, you can ask me to do that with a proposal of how you anticipate that would happen. Because obviously there'd be a lot of details to work out. We already have an O&M entity out there. And so how can we have somebody else other than us own it? Those kind of things. But I wanted to leave the door open that if you actually got to the point of wanting to do this and fleshing out a proposal, you can ask me to research that. So that's eligibility. If I go on to the steps, the first one is, in general, the irrigation district would want this. They would want to do title transfer, so they would ask us. They would put in a request, and then we would sit down with them, and we have an information sheet that we would go through them. It's fairly detailed, that looks at what facilities are they requesting to be transferred, what actions we would identify, the process that would need to be completed, and then making sure that they're eligible. We would also enter into a memorandum of agreement where they would, where we would work together to describe our roles and responsibilities in the title transfer process. And then also the districts would be reimbursing Reclamation for Reclamation's cost to complete the title transfer study. And so those are things like our administrative costs, the realty work, the contract work, the environmental compliance, things of that nature. So I don't have a firm, and that's going to depend district by district, because it depends how complicated the title transfer process would be based on the information that we would collect when we start. But I'll just give you kind of just to get you in the ballpark. If I look at a recent, at a couple of recent processes that are going on in Idaho, which kind of seems similar to our district areas in terms of what they would need. It comes to about 120,000 to cover reclamation's costs. So that's for the memorandum of agreement. Also during the process, we would need to look at if the irrigation district still has a repayment obligation. So you remember in the beginning, I talked about these districts have been paying on the capital costs. Some of them have paid out, which means they already paid their obligation for the actual capital investment. And if it's acquired lands, they've already paid for the lands too. The complicating factor is we also have a lot of withdrawn lands, which means they are still part of the federal estate and they haven't been paid for by anyone. So that's a consideration, which I'll get to a little bit more later. But essentially, once reclamation and the irrigation district, it's a process. We go through the process and reach a mutual agreement on the terms of the title transfer. We get that written down into a contract. We provide written notice to Congress. It sits before Congress for 90 days for review. And then if Congress doesn't pass a joint resolution to block the transfer, it may proceed. And all of the documents and deeds and other legal instruments are ready to move forward. So that's the process. Now, when we look at pros and cons, and this is something, when we've shared this information with our irrigation districts, because it's pretty new. I mean, the Dingle Act was passed last year, and it was just in March of this year where Reclamation has given us, we've got directives and standards. And now in Wyoming area office, we took a look at, well, how does that translate to our irrigation districts? So we did make the irrigation districts aware of this, what's been on our mind in terms of the top considerations. And I've got 11 of them, so I'll try to move through them quickly. But certainly, one of the considerations is, do they still owe, that they would still owe on the operations and maintenance costs of the reserved works, regardless of if they went to title transfer or if they just stayed with O&M transfer. So there's really no change there. There's this, number 2 is this thing called project use power. We have a couple of districts that have a contract with us for project use power, which means they get it at a much reduced rate for power. And there is a way, it is possible that would continue, and we would work through a process with them to see if that would be possible. In terms of water smart grants, a district may still be eligible regardless of if they're O&M transfer or if they title transfer. So they would just have to look at the water smart funding grant release, public release, to see if they would qualify. Another consideration, the reclamation extraordinary maintenance loans that I talked about earlier, or contracts, they would not be eligible if they title transferred. So that's probably a big one for them to think about, because that's a big change. They wouldn't be eligible anymore for that financial assistance. But however, and we've heard this come up before, is that I'm not aware, but they may be aware, perhaps by them owning it, it may open up other funding sources. So that's just something for them to consider. Another consideration is reclamation wouldn't do inspections or issue recommendations anymore if they owned the facilities. So they would be doing those kind of things on their own. If a district wants to alter the facilities in a substantial way, currently they have to ask for approval from reclamation because we still own it. If they owned it, they can do what they want. They wouldn't, in terms of asking reclamation for approval, they wouldn't need to do that. In terms of compliance with federal laws like National Environmental Policy Act, National Historic Preservation Act, Endangered Species, things of that nature. Right now, we have to comply and they have to comply because it's a federal facility, but if it goes into irrigation district ownership, as part of the title transfer process, there would be a negotiation with the Wyoming regulatory agencies to see, and possibly U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, to see if those agencies wanted to have still some oversight. And that would be spelled out in that transfer agreement. Liability came up earlier, so I'm sorry I'm getting to this now. But in terms of liability, it is something for the districts to consider. We suggest that they talk to their legal counsel to get advice on that, one way or the other, whether it's better or not. So it's a consideration. We have a lot of our districts benefit.
So just before you move on from that, if I understand correctly, so the liability currently lies with the Bureau of Reclamation, say in the instance of Goshen irrigation districts, since that's one we're all kind of thinking about. If somebody would have got hurt as a result of that failure, would the Bureau of Rec be on the hook for liability reasons, even though you've transferred the O&M to a different entity?
So in terms of let me pull out that again, hold on one second. Mr. Chairman, many of the contracts, the contracts that we have with our irrigation districts have several clauses in there of holding the United States harmless for anything as an outgrowth of the transferred works. Now, liability is a hot topic and of course a legal matter. So I can't, I'm not an attorney, and certainly an irrigation district could think otherwise and have a discussion with us, and if it needed to go to a legal matter, that's the route it would need to take for a resolution. But as far as our understanding of the contract, that's why those hold harmless clauses are in there, in terms of making it clear that the districts are going to hold us harmless.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple more considerations. We have in several cases where the transferred works facilities goes over private lands. We have an 1890 Canal Act easement. We would need to work with the districts to see how we can get that conveyed to them if they take over title. So it's just another consideration. And then of course the cost. So of course it's unknown at this time. You know, that's what you learn when you do the title transfer study. So once we actually get started, we enter in an MOA, and then we go down that path. But there's a couple of things to consider, and I think I mentioned them before. Is the district repaid for their capital? And if they are, then great, that helps. If not, then we just have to have that worked out in the title transfer agreement of how they're going to get that portion repaid. And then, and as I mentioned, we only have 3 districts that aren't repaid. And then the second consideration that seems to have a really large bearing on what kind of costs would be coming to the district is if there are withdrawn lands that the district needs or wants to have as part of the transfer. So we tried to pull some examples to, again, maybe give you some perspective, but I only offer them as, you know, and this one is just one example, and every case will be different. But there currently is, in Utah, there's a project, the Emery County project, and it's sitting actually before US Congress in that waiting period for review. And we understand that the district is going to pay $66,000 for for the title transfer. And again, the withdrawn land, we have a lot of withdrawn lands, but that doesn't mean that the districts need it. So that's part of that back and forth in the beginning where we would decide, well, what is it that you're asking for, irrigation districts? Do you want more land or not? And if they don't need it, then that's where they could really save on costs. Right now, Reclamation owns a lot of areas that kind of surround the facilities, but that aren't necessary for the operations and maintenance or title transfer. And I believe that's all I have for that topic. Are there any questions?
Hey, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The withdrawn lands portion, what is the purpose of the Bureau of Rec owning lands that aren't necessary for the dams or tunnels or whatever? Was it simply purchased? I mean, it had to go with it when they put the project together, or what was the purpose? I guess maybe a little clarity there.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Clausen, yes, thank you for that question. Originally, when Reclamation set out to build these projects, design them, obviously, land was needed for placement of reservoirs and then also for the canals and laterals. In some cases, we were able to purchase land directly from perhaps a private entity, and those are called acquired lands. In other cases, we were able to withdraw the land from the federal estate, and most often, you think of that with BLM. So we withdrew it from BLM's management, and when we were able to build these projects. The third thing is that we were able to use easements to build, and that was over private land. But again, that was through, in this case, in most cases, the 1890 Canal Act. So we have a program where every year, and it's on a 5-year cycle, we look at all of our lands on a 5-year cycle and determine, do we really need to have it for operations and maintenance of these projects? And do our irrigation districts need Reclamation to have it for their operations and maintenance? Because it's a partnership. And if we don't, then there's a process where we can revocate the withdrawn lands and essentially get it back into, if it's a withdrawn land, get it back to BLM in most cases. If it's acquired land, that there's another process where it can be essentially, ultimately, I think, sold. So the goal, Representative, is that we don't keep what we don't need. And it's a long process, and you've got several agencies involved. But we have several of those requests on the books.
Okay, just following up on that question, do you have any successful transfers recently? If I understand correctly, there are some folks who have requested that, but when's the last time something like that was completed?
Goodness, I have some experience in my previous position down in Colorado, but it doesn't help us for here. So I'm going to, since I've been here, we've put in requests, but they're still working in process through the Bureau of Land Management. Mahanrai, do you know of any before I got here?
So could I ask a clarifying question? Are you asking about successful title transfers or successful revocation of withdrawn lands?
Either or. I mean, any successful transfers at all wouldn't be helpful. Yeah.
I'm not aware of any title transfer of reclamation facilities in the Wyoming area office. There have been some revocations of reclamation land that have gone through. I think it's been We've had some small parcels that have gone through, but there were a number of years ago, there were some large tracts that had been withdrawn for proposed reclamation projects that were not developed. And eventually over time, it didn't look like they were going to be developed. And so those were turned back to the Bureau of Land Management. It's been a number of years ago since that happened, but there were some very large tracts kind of out in the Cody area, between Cody, Matisse, the Grable River Valley, that area. Again, that's been a number of years, but there haven't been any large blocks that have been revocated that I'm aware of in recent years. But we have been working with BLM on some smaller tracts.
Okay, thank you. And would that be will you characterize that as a primarily a BLM driven process, or who's kind of the decision maker who does the most work between Bureau of Rec and BLM?
Mr. Chairman, I would say we would need to initiate it, and we do some preliminary studies. We have to get out there and do some surveys, make sure there's no hazards, and identify if there are any encumbrances on the land. And we would need to submit all of the paperwork to BLM. And then when it gets into their hands, I understand it's quite a process, and it actually has to go pretty high up in their chain to get approval. So it's both of us have to work, and we're kind of on the front end, and then they finish it up. But I do understand it's quite involved.
Okay, any questions, committee, for the Bureau of Rec? Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Carly and Hanrai, for coming. I appreciate you being with us today. Your information has been really helpful. You mentioned that within 2 weeks of requesting the Goshen Irrigation District, you had money available to them, $2 million in addition to. Is that in the form of a loan or a grant?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Simpson, thank you. It's good to see you too. The Goshen Irrigation District extraordinary maintenance contract was in the form of both a portion was a grant and a portion was a loan, and we consider reimbursable and non-reimbursable. It was 65% reimbursable and 35% non-reimbursable. So essentially a 35% grant. And yeah, so it did, it was a pretty quick turnaround, but the lag in the beginning, of course, there was the failure, and everybody was scrambling around. The districts did an excellent job of coming up with plans and trying to figure out what to do. That took a couple weeks, and get the contractor on board, and then they put the request into us, and we got into motion. It was about 4 weeks after the collapse of the money, but because the request didn't come in, but somewhere in there in the 2 to 4 week period, they had money, whether you go from when they asked or from the disaster. But thank you for that question.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
No,
Representative
I just
Simpson, go ahead.
indicated thank you.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah, good question. Good to know. Any further questions, committee? We good, pal? I can't hardly see you there. But...
We're still here, doing good. No questions.
All right. Sounds good. Okay, well, seeing no further discussion, I really appreciate that information. It was very helpful for me. I didn't know exactly how that working relationship actually plays out in real life, and so that's a really helpful information. I appreciate you providing it, and we'll see if we have any follow-ups at a future date. So thanks again. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is 3 o'clock. We just got a few more topics. Basically, I will continue with the water development office, but let's just go ahead and take a quick 5 minute break. Come back, or 10 minute break, excuse me. Come back at 3:10, and we'll get going on Wyoming water development. All right, we'll go ahead and get started again here. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started again here. Looks like we got just about everybody back, more or less. So last topic for today, or continuation, I guess, is water development. We got Wyoming Water Development Commission and the state engineer, it looks like, here patiently waiting. So go ahead and take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll also point out that hidden in the dark corners out of camera, I've got a team of people. And if time allows, I believe we have some updates from the previous meeting, some of the questions that we can do at the end as well. But I guess the first discussion item is the draft bill for the accounts, the development accounts tax distributions. Am I tracking correctly, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, that's up first. Yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I put some thought into this, and I understand the intent of the bill, and I'm just trying to explain some things that to lead me to believe that I think we can already do this with what the intent was of this draft bill. As you all are aware, we are a sponsor-driven agency, and what that means is we really don't know what the demand is on what account until the applications come in. So a sponsor makes an application to us, and then we park it into one of these categories, whether it be account 1, account 2, or account 3, depending on the project itself. And that changes from application period to application period. So we really don't know what pocket that fits in already. And then to further kind of explain the way we have done this in the past, and it's been successful and worked well, is we've used the omnibus water bill to transfer from one account to another. So if we get a higher demand on one account, then we will prepare the omnibus bill as a recommendation to the legislature. And the first stop for that, as you know, is this committee once it gets to legislature. But we have requested transfers from one account to the other in the past. And a perfect example was last year, we requested a transfer from Buffalo Bill to account 2. So the demand on account 2 last year was pretty high, and that was largely because of a couple of large projects. In particular, Wheatland Irrigation District was a $5 million project appropriation roughly that hit that account, which isn't usual in that account. Although, as we discuss aging infrastructure, it may become more and more usual, if you will. But to further help us with that, at our August commission meeting and select water committee meeting, I presented a combination of our project priorities. So currently we've got project priorities for each of our accounts. And so we park a project application into an account, and then we prioritize within that account. So to help with this concept, we presented a combined priority list that meshes account 1 and account 2. So what will happen now is we can prioritize based on their account, and then we could cross-reference to see how those 2 account priorities line up. So in the end, what we will end up with is basically a prioritized list of all the projects in account 1 and account 2. And then depending on the funding availability and the eligibility of the project, if we are short funds, then we can use that priority, say we can fund up to this level, and then we can back it back out into accounts. And then in the omnibus bill, we would ask to transfer money from one account to the other if need be in that given year to make sure that we're funding the projects that are prioritized in that manner. I guess.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Yes, I'd like I think I'm going to make a motion at this time to table this bill. I think it would be best for this committee to not bring the topic up and invite other issues. So I'm going to make that motion.
Okay, we could, yeah, that's fine. Lots of seconds, and I guess we'll go ahead and do that with extreme prejudice, and then let our let our Water Development Commission continue their testimony after that. But okay, so that's a motion that I guess to table the bill draft. Of course, the alternative is just to not do anything with it. But motion's on the table. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Thank you for that. In Powell, we have 2.
I think I have 10. All those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. Oh, 1. Okay, all right. That motion carries. Yeah, I think the purpose of the bill draft, obviously, we didn't even get to the point where we filled in any numbers there, was to kind of have this conversation. And I think there's still lots of concerns, especially when you talk about the number of studies that never seem to go anywhere. And then we have some real problems that would need to be addressed. And so I think we're kind of getting at that with this sort of combined approach that Mr. Gephardt was talking about. So if you just continue discussing that, that'd be great.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. And if it interests you, I do have some a couple of spreadsheets put together that we can look at the 10-year history of the appropriations and the revenues in each of those counts, if that would help just kind of identify what we've seen historically. If that pleasures you, we can certainly pull those up. Otherwise, I guess I would say 2 things. One, to your point about studies that don't go anywhere. I do see how the optics of that play out, but it's my opinion that some of those studies, even though they don't come back to us for further advancement of a study or even into construction, a lot of times that provides those entities with the tool that they can use to help prioritize their programs and wherever they get funding to further that. It may not be through us. So some of those studies may lead to something that we aren't aware of. So that's my only caveat on that. And
do you have any evidence that suggests the frequency with which those studies are followed up on outside of the Water Development Office?
Mr. Chairman, one example, I just had a conversation with one of the sponsors last week, and we did a master plan. It was for a water system, but we did a master plan with them, I believe in 2017, and they identified, I believe, 10 priority projects, and they have completed all but 1 or 2 of those projects. And a majority of those were outside of our program. They have used our program for some of them. But really, once that study leaves our office, we haven't been keeping track of how they've implemented that after that.
Okay, Representative Simpson, you have something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to try to address that question. I would submit to you that every study we do is beneficial in some way to the sponsor. As you're aware, I've been doing studies for 30 years. Even the ones that don't progress to a level 2 and level 3, I still follow up in those meetings, and they talk about the results of those studies. They plan for future events. I mean, a study is really valuable to these folks, and I don't think any of them ever go for naught. I really think there's significant value to all of them. Thanks.
All right, any further discussion, committee? Okay, we'll kick it back to Water Development then.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I guess one last point that I would make on this topic is, I think the agency's been very fortunate in the past, and I believe that we have funded a majority, if not all, of the applications that meet the mustard and are vetted through the program. I believe we met a majority of the demand currently. I do understand that the future is different right now. But I think it plays back into utilizing those priorities. And it could even lead to further scrutiny of the priorities and further refinement of that and further development of priorities within priorities. So I don't think that this is by any means the end. It's the beginning of how we look at these priorities and kind of mesh the two accounts together and work through what's more important at the time. So some more work to come on that. And unless anybody has any questions, Mr. Chairman, I don't have anything else on that.
Okay, so that, yeah, and part of it's meant to, I guess, engender a discussion amongst us as legislators as to what the, what we may have to do to increase funding and not keep on, kind of cutting back on water development. And so whatever mechanism we can think of, I think legislatively, I think I've talked to you over the phone, this is an important topic. And it's clear to me that there's going to be some serious challenges in water infrastructure in Wyoming over the next couple decades. So I think it's important that we do something and do something more than rearrange the decks or the chairs on the deck of the Titanic here. So just food for thought committee. Yeah, we'll be having that discussion moving forward. Absolutely. But yeah, so I guess we can move on to the development survey then.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple comments on the draft bill. Again, in anticipation of this, we presented to the Commission and Select Water Committee and ultimately ended up with a change to our program criteria in relation to this survey. And the criteria is actually out for public comment currently. And what the change was in the criteria is that if an entity comes to us or a sponsor comes to us for a project, then they are required to fill out our existing irrigation and water system survey. That was strongly recommended in the past. It will now be a requirement. So I believe it's very much in line with the intent of this bill, and I think that criteria goes hand in hand with this bill. My only comment on the bill itself is on page 2 of the bill and lines 9 through 11. I know we had some discussion on this at the last meeting, and this has to do with whether this information would be made public or not. And I appreciate that this language is put in here, but unless Mr. Kennedy's presentation here in a little bit changes my thought process, I don't know that this has to remain private. I've been talking with Mr. Lanning a little bit and how they handle some of the dam data. But unless Mr. Kennedy presents something different, lines 9 through 11 may not be necessary.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was kind of my gut inclination, having dealt with sensitive information in a previous life. Yeah, I appreciate that information. And just in terms of us helping you kind of get more compliance with this survey, what would you say the average frequency is of an irrigation district or another entity coming to water development for these funds? And just wondering if it's something that they only do maybe every 5 years. It's not, it might be a while before we get some complete information. So just your assessment as to how quickly your rule changes will compel some of these entities to provide the information.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and it kind of segues into, I'll start some of the the presentation that I mentioned earlier and give you kind of an update on where we stand now. So as we discussed last time, we developed a survey for irrigation districts. And well, let me back up and explain what our surveys do now. So we have two surveys, one for water systems and the other for irrigation systems. And each of those surveys runs every other year. So every year we're doing a survey, but irrigation gets one year and then it skips a year to the next year. Same with the water systems. And so this year was an off year for the irrigation systems. So we developed this system survey, and you were provided a memo and an example of the survey that was sent out. And that was sent out in July, and then a follow-up in August. To date, we sent it initially to 116 email addresses, and those email addresses came from the database of people who had previously participated in our survey over the history of that survey. And so we sent it to 116 emails, and as of August 27th, we've only received 27 back. So that's a 23% response rate. Which at this time is not very good. We have heard from several other districts who are still completing that. And so we hope to get more. But I do think that we'll probably have to put in a bigger effort to kind of prod these people, explain why we're doing the survey, that it's not to illustrate their deficiencies or anything like that, but it's to help you folks and us as agencies to plan for what this is. So I do think there's some legwork yet to be done on this, but we have started. I feel good about the start. You'll hear some of the results that we've seen so far, and they're pretty dramatic. So it is a worthwhile effort, and it's something that we intend to continue on, and it plays into some of our other, I guess, initiatives that we have internally as far as data collection and really what we're looking at. So again, this one's not done. We've got a lot of work to do still. To answer your question is what you can do to help us. Legislatively, I don't know. Our issue is with us requiring it, we really have no teeth other than to say you can't play in our sandbox or get our money if you don't fill out this survey. And I wonder if there's any legislation that would have any other teeth to require these people. I'm afraid maybe not. So I guess legislatively, I don't know what there is from that perspective, but we've been trying to get the message out to some of our sister agencies as well as some of the community groups that we're involved with to kind of illustrate that. We just presented to the rural water users a couple days ago and mentioned it and got support from the rural water user group that they will push these surveys as well. So getting the word out and the reason for the survey, I think would help. But as far as legislatively, I'm not sure.
I could think of a pretty quick amendment that says that they have to respond to it. I'm not sure if we're really going to go so far as to, find somebody if they don't respond or something like that. But I think there's plenty that we can do to make it a matter of law, saying that anybody who has taken these funds in the past or might apply for them later, they need to respond to the survey and as necessary. So I guess I kind of disagree in that, we do have a lot of tools on our toolbox to compel that compliance. And especially if we move forward with the bill and demonstrate that we are in fact serious about this, I think that's important as we move forward in your efforts, move forward to explain the reasoning and all that. Those are all very good. I'm sure we'll continue concurrently with the legislative process. So any questions, committee, right now? Senator Moniz.
Thank you. Just a question for Brandon. The rules stipulate that they will not get funding if they do not complete the survey. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's what our criteria was changed to, that in order to get funding, they would have to complete the survey.
So basically, we're saying the same thing, Brian, that we're talking about here. I'm not so sure that a law is going to change the outcome much here, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the open question is to not necessarily tie it to funding, but just say the entity shall comply, and leave it at that. I don't know if that'll affect anybody's decision making or not. I guess that's the open question. Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, Director. So with these surveys, does it give you enough information, or do you have a mechanism in place to actually project the financial needs for the future? I guess what we're looking for here is to plan for disasters, or know what kind of shape we need to make, what kind of shape our infrastructure is, so we know what kind of investment we need to make in the future, kind of plan and looking way down the road or even into the horizon. Do you guys have a mechanism in place internally, or is that something you need to work on? Are these surveys enough? That's kind of where I'm asking.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, some of the specific questions we do ask is their capital improvement plan essentially for the next period of years. And so we're asking those questions specifically of what do they anticipate funding needs for the next 5 years, so the next 5 to 10, and I believe beyond 10 years, and to list each of those projects. So we are trying to capture that in this, and we're asking them for their input on what their needs are, and to, a lot of times they may be a guess as to cost, but it does give us an idea of the magnitude of this. So that is in these surveys currently.
Okay, Representative Simpson.
Couple of comments, Mr. Chairman. First, Director Gephardt, I'd suggest that July and August probably isn't the right months to send out a survey to irrigators. They're pretty busy and it's really easy for them to be out in the field. I would suggest you make a push in late August, October or November maybe, and you'll get a little better results on your surveys. To committee members, I'm looking at this draft bill and it just simply says the commission, we're talking about the Water Development Commission, the commission shall create a survey to gather data. And I'm totally at a loss of why we're putting in statutes a simple policy that the department is already doing and have done for years and will continue to do it simply by asking it. It seems to me like we ought to table this one and put it aside. I don't think we ought to spend a lot of time in the legislature worrying about a survey when it's already being done. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, Senator Cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number one, I'm going to say I agree with Representative Simpson. It seems like maybe we don't really need to do this. Number two is, if their survey they sent out said that if they don't complete it, they won't get funding, I'd say hold them to it if that's the case, and just they're not going to get the funding, and that way maybe they'll know. But I do believe that if we would send this out, or if they would send this out a little later in the year after the irrigation's let up, you've probably got a much better chance of getting a better return from it.
Okay, Co-Chairman Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I would be in favor of this bill, and my reasoning being that I just think that there need to be, obviously there can be the responsibility of the department and of the office to hold these folks' feet to the fire. But I remember several years ago now seeing a return on surveys done around the state, and the numbers that the committee was looking at that time, in some cases, not all, but in some, there had been no updates to their information from those specific districts or those specific municipalities in years. It had been, some of them were 20, 25, 30 years out of date. And so they were effectively, for the benefit of the committee, and the information that was trying to be shared was essentially useless. And so I really do think that that there is some merit in this bill, and that if we are to, with the tightening of the belt and so on and so forth, just on the broader spectrum, I think that this would be helpful in ensuring that, when it comes to planning and when it comes to prioritization in those early stages, that there is more willingness on the part of the district that is applying for the funding and for the project that they have in mind, to have some more skin in the game. And so I think that's I guess that's why I will be voting in favor of that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate that, Co-Chairman Hunt. Is just, I appreciate, and I guess if I was going to express a little bit of frustration, I know that there's a lot of people on this call that have lots of experience in water development, but I'm looking at what happened in Goshen. I'm looking at the issues we have with La Perelle Dam here in Commerce County. I look at the issues that we have in Natrona County. I just don't think this attitude that we're going to just continue and everything's hunky-dory is irresponsible in my mind. And so if this isn't it, I'd look, if we're just going to table these bills and say everything's okay with some minor adjustments, I just highly suggest that folks with more experience than me, I'll admit I'm not, I don't have experience with water development nearly as much on this committee, but we need to figure out a way to prioritize this and get some more resources into water development. And simply saying, oh, we're going to tweak a few things here and there, I just don't think it's going to cut it. So if these bills aren't the answer, I'd ask the committee, what is the answer? And I ask water development, as I have on multiple occasions leading up to this meeting, what is the answer? Because simply sitting around saying we're good, that's just not acceptable in my mind. Representative Simpson.
I have a stab at that. I totally agree with you, both co-chairmen, totally. The results of the survey is very, very important. There is no question of the results of the survey. I encourage the director to really work hard at gathering the data in this fall so we can have information. The thing that I'm just not comfortable with is on page 2, that's what all page 2 does is say the Water Development Commission shall direct the staff to conduct a survey. That's all we're accomplishing here. And that's why I'm just questioning the value of this particular draft. If we want to get down in the weeds, let's get down in the weeds and say, what are we going to do and how are we going to enforce it? But to simply say, we want you to conduct a survey just seems to be a lot of fluff with no meat. That's my issue, is not the survey, but rather just the wording in this draft.
I completely agree that we need to maybe, there's already been one suggestion for an amendment, and there's probably a few more that need to happen to make it have a little bit of teeth there. Because I agree with Representative Simpson's assessment that, yeah, there's not much there. I think there probably needs to be a deadline. There needs to be expectation that there'll be a response. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, back to the point that July and August are not good times, I don't disagree at all. Our normal surveys will probably go out in January, and I don't remember what the deadline is. So the timing will be different once this is fully implemented. But we wanted to get it out as quick as we could to start informing this group through this process up leading to the next legislative session with as much data as we could. So we tried to get it out quickly and tried to start collecting some data. And Mr. Chairman, to your point, yeah, we've heard the message about, basically what are some fundamental changes that we need to make to the program, or really, whether it's stretch our money further or really address the issues that we've got coming up. I hear you loud and clear. I really do. My concern, well, not my concern, but what I'm really trying to straddle is not getting too far out in front of my commission and select water committee on some of these decisions or offerings. But these conversations, we're having those internally, and we will be having them with the commission. I think everybody's aware of the situation, both with aging infrastructure and budgets, and everybody's concerned. And we really are having those conversations and looking at some monumental potentially shifts in the agency. So we're hearing you. I just want time to work through it with the commission, make sure I'm not overstepping my bounds as the director, and really put some good thought into it. But everybody's hearing the message, and I agree completely that right now is the time to start looking at something.
Okay, any further discussion, committee? Okay, and just Mr. Gephardt, when's your next commission meeting? Can you just give us, I guess, a schedule for the fall as to when you're going to be meeting, and what your, I guess, what your timeline is, since you don't want to get it out in front of anybody. Just a little bit of discussion along where the way you see this proceeding, I guess, up until the legislative session in January.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we've got our next meeting in October, and then we've got another one in November. And I'll just offer this up because it was brought to my attention in the legislative session. One of the discussions at that time that of a potential amendment that was never an amendment was to look at the funding split of how we grant loan funding split and modifying that. So, I mean, some of those types of discussions are occurring, and we're hoping to have a little better idea of what we're going to be seeing as far as funding, but we understand that that's not going to happen, but we need to be proactive on that. So we are, that's one example of something that we'll be discussing.
And just for my background, since I don't know, what sort of requirements do you have for, speaking of funding, that these local entities, whether it be a municipality or an irrigation district, that they kind of do some raising of funds by themselves? Do you require that they increase their levies or their what they charge their users before they come to you?
Mr. Chairman, we currently require, particularly on the loan portion, a promissory note at this time. Several years ago, we used to require a sinking fund that the entity would develop for the value of, I believe, the loan portion of any funding that we did. That would be an account that they would set up so that they had putting money away for operation and maintenance and potentially replacement, although I don't think that was one of the requirements. I believe it was a couple of years ago, there was some discussion in legislature, and those requirements were relaxed. And I believe there are many good reasons why those requirements were relaxed, but they were relaxed. And previous to that, we did require a sinking fund as part of our funding and our contract with these entities. But there have been a lot of discussion about that concept as well. So.
And so if I make sure I understand that, it wasn't necessarily a verbatim requirement that you raise your rates or your assessments or anything, but the net effect of requiring the sinking funds that they'd have to basically do that, or otherwise come up with the funds somehow.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the intent really is to make sure that they could repay I believe that they could repay and then operate and maintain the state's investment. And I'm not opposed to that. We did not, to my knowledge, have any, previous to me being here, I don't know that we require any rate increase or anything like that. And so I don't know how that happens. We do try to collect some of that data. That data has historically been all over the board. It's pretty tough to compare rates and assessments apples to apples, just because different crops yield different prices and their ability to pay is different, as well as the complexity of a system. A simple system may not cost as much, and you don't have the liabilities. So to do it across the board becomes difficult. Not saying that I'm opposed to looking at it, but there are some things to consider.
Okay, any further questions, committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, go ahead.
have we moved the bill? If not, I will move the bill.
Okay, there's a motion to move 21 LSO 8. Second by
And I will be bringing an amendment to try to bring some enforcement into it.
Okay, all right. Looks like Representative Hunt seconded it. So Representative Larson, you have the floor.
All right, I'd like to bring an amendment to this, and starting on line 9 at the beginning, just ideas, but I'll bring it forward. This survey is a requirement for project funding and must be returned by April 1st. That's it.
Okay, April 21st, 2021, or is just say April 1st?
Of each year, how's that go? Or each year the survey sent out?
Okay, gotcha. So annual update requirement, I guess.
How about each year the survey is sent out?
Okay, gotcha. Okay, and seconded by Representative Hunt, it looks like.
Mr. Chairman, I was just wanting a clarification on that. If Representative Larson could repeat that, and just because as I understand, we are striking the existing language starting on line 9 and inserting what you have recommended, but go ahead.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, no, I was not striking anything. I was just going to insert on line 9 at the beginning. This survey is a requirement for project funding and must be returned by April 1st, the year the survey sent out or such.
Okay, so we got an amendment that would put some teeth in this draft bill. So any discussion? Representative Simpson.
Dr. Gephardt, could you respond to that? How does that language work for you?
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to help out with the funding of, or the language for any given year, because we do alternate them. Trying to wordsmith that a little bit in my head. So this survey is a requirement for project funding and due April 1st.
How about the year the survey is sent?
Of the year the survey is administered.
Yes.
So page 2.
Probably send it out at the end of a year, so the April 1st would be.
And so it seems like we almost have to have it be in a cyclical manner that's consistent with the irrigation season. So I like the idea of the deadline being April 1st, or sometime in the spring, perhaps. So Representative Larson, just clarification, do you mean the same calendar year? So they have to send out the survey January and then they need it back by April, or would it be like the year prior? So the full year prior to April 1st. So it could be of April 2nd, the year before.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how to word that. If they're going to send it out in January, then that would work. If they're going to send it out in November, I would like it to be within that 6 months, April 1st. So I need help wording that.
All right, I think we got the concept, and committee, not to preclude any discussion, but this could be a good bill just to with these we can work the amendments today and refine the bill, and it's something we can just kind of I guess punt to our November meeting, at which point we'll have a better idea of whether we get a better response from the survey or not. But yeah, absolutely not something we absolutely have to take final action on today. But I think it's good to work the bill and maybe delay the final vote until November potentially, which would give us time to work out the details with water development as well.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, one thing that we'll consider as we continue this process is our planning project applications are due March 1st. So we may consider that when we think about this deadline.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator, okay, go ahead, Representative Larson, real quick.
I call a question on the amendment.
Okay, we had some discussion. Looks like Senator Bouchard had his hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add, while we were doing an amendment, maybe to amend the amendment, I'm kind of concerned that, this is barred from public record, but I want to make sure that the committee is brought into this, because if we're going to go to all this trouble, I think the committee has to have access. So I don't know how to amend that, but I would like, some discussion on that.
No, I agree. I think we have some other work to do when it comes to the public records element. And so once we dispose of this amendment, we can entertain others. Absolutely. Okay, so somebody call a question on Representative Larson's amendment. Any more last minute discussion?
Question.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand.
There are two in Powell raising their hand.
Okay, looks like I have 6 and 4. All those opposed. Okay, looks like 4 are opposed, so that amendment carries. Okay, anybody have an amendment regarding the Public Records Act discussion on lines 9 through 11?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion or an amendment.
All right, you're on a roll. Go ahead.
Maybe I'll just go ahead and do it. At the end of line 11, insert information collected will be available for the commission, the Select Water Committee, and the Agriculture Committee.
Okay, so basically a requirement to report the results to those entities then?
Yes, I should have said it that way, I guess.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, no, just to make sure I understand. Representative Simpson.
Kayla, can we do that? Is that legal?
You're still muted, Kayla.
My apologies. Mr. Chairman and Representative Simpson, that was just the thought that was going through my head. Certainly anything that's provided to the legislature or anything like that, those things are posted. So any information that's provided in that way, that will probably destroy, that would then of course be a public record. So I'm not sure if there's a broader issue there, but I think there would definitely be some pieces of information that then would become a public record if there's reports to certain public groups.
Okay, and committee, to be clear, it's I think we had also a suggestion just to delete the exemption from the Public Records Act as well. So that's a discussion as well that we're going to have. So Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I guess that would be one way to do it. I mean, if there's something we're trying to stop, I mean, we could put a redaction clause of some of the things. I mean, I think some of it has to be. I mean, I don't really understand the full reason why we would keep it private. So can we have more discussion about that?
Yeah, we absolutely can. And another option available would just to go in and amend the Public Records Act to include dams. There's already a reference to bridges, tunnels, like sort of the structural plans to those physical structures that are already exempt from the Public Records Act. And so, you know, in the case of a legislative committee or whatever public entity, they'd have to go into executive session to receive that information. So that'd be another way of going about doing that potentially. And if I misspoke, please, Kayla, correct me. But it'd be an easy amendment in Title 16 to add dams to the list of public infrastructure, which is sensitive in nature. So there's that. But you know, we do have. I believe we had. Mr. Kennedy, who's going to also have this, who's going to present on this general topic. And so not to preclude your presentation, Mr. Kennedy, but can you maybe give us some information here on just in general regarding the whatever sensitivity we have to be aware of when it comes to this sort of information?
I'm certainly not the expert, Mr. Chairman. It actually might be better at some point to have a conversation with Nathan Graves, who's actually the Wyoming representative for the State Dam Association group. But given my experience with security in both the chemical and the transportation sector, I think this is at least indirectly related to transportation. A couple of thoughts on that. The discussion that is ongoing. First of all, I think there is a way for the State Engineer's Office, Water Development, to aggregate information from this survey so that you can use this primarily for more than immediate planning. It's obvious that some information about the location of the facility has to be there when it's going to be funded that year. But as far as planning for longer term, it would appear to me that information could remain public as long as it was aggregated so that the exact location of facilities wasn't there, and that would be a fairly simple fix. The other thing, and I'll call out Senator Cost. He actually had a bill that was approved by the Judiciary Committee last Friday that would also address this, albeit not specifically for dams. And perhaps Senator Cost would want to spend a minute and a half on that, but I found that bill to be on point as well for keeping information confidential that ought to be kept that way for the security both of the facility and of people on other property that might be affected by any sort of nefarious activity.
Okay, so yeah, it looks like we have some information about SSI, or was it sensitive security information? It relies to transportation type issues. I don't see any reference to actual dams and that information either in the little one pager we got from TSA or the Federal Register. I see no references to dams or any type of irrigation infrastructure in there. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I would be happy to send Katie a link that she could send out to the committee that is specific for dams. Dams are one of the 16 types of infrastructure that Homeland Security believes are important. And I do have that information. I can send a link to that to her to send out to the rest of the committee. And to kind of follow up on that, I can't take the training myself, and I'll read from just a very short paragraph on one of the information sheets here. Due to the sensitivity of the information provided within the dam sector security awareness and dam sector protective measures training courses, both have been designated for official use only and thus are only accessible through the Homeland Security Information Network Critical Sectors Dam Portal. So in other words, there does have to be some sort of clearance to even access those particular training modules.
Okay, any questions about the information security here?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I don't know the nomenclature, but maybe a simple solution would be that the something such that sensitive security information provided in these surveys shall not be a public record, or whatever the terminology needs to be for that. And we could just limit it to whatever the sensitive information, but then if we can aggregate it and that's not sensitive, then I think we could put it out to the public.
Sure. And I guess a question for water development. Do you ever have any experience with any type of sensitive information? Do you have these sort of SSI control procedures? Are you familiar with? Or
Mr. Chairman, not that I'm familiar with, but I think it warrants a deeper look for sure.
right. And just once again, based off of at least my experience with the highly above top secret clearance with the U.S. government, it seems to me that this sort of information is already protected using federal standards. And if we were dealing with it, we would definitely know it. It's not this ambiguous thing that is out there and is a matter of open question. I think that if we did have, if there's a facility in Wyoming that was subject to this sort of information, maybe there are with the Bureau of Rec, with their the assets that they retained, that we'd probably already know about it, and it would be a very clearly defined entity and a well-known entity. It strikes me that maybe some of the infrastructure that's been transferred over to the irrigation district maybe just doesn't rise to the level of that level of concern. So it's just this discussion is interesting, but I just the way that these things work is that there's never any ambiguity. If there's controlled information, we would be subject to it, and we would be well versed in its and how to do that. So I really don't see the need to keep this information from the public, especially since it is a report by its nature. It's going to be an aggregate form, and certainly if anybody hears otherwise, that's I'd love to hear it, but ultimately it sounds like these are federal standards and the federal government is responsible for enforcing it. So anyways, I don't think Representative Larson's amendment had a second, did it? Okay, so seeing no okay, Representative Hunt, you seconded it. Okay, so the discussion here is to add a requirement that they share the survey with, you might have to help me, Representative Larson, Water Development, the Select Water Committee, and Joint Ag Committee, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay, so that's the discussion. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand.
Two in Powell.
Okay, that makes 4 total in favor. All those opposed? Okay, it looks like 6 opposed. That motion fails. All right, committee. Does anybody want, I guess I'll entertain a motion to just delete lines 9 through 11 on page 2.
Second.
So moved by Representative Blake. Do I hear a second? Okay, Senator Moniz.
Question.
Okay, don't see any discussion. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. Anybody in Powell?
I think we're both no's.
Okay, so that's 5 in favor. All those opposed, raise your hand.
2 in Powell.
Oh, that's 5 to 5. Chair votes aye, so that motion carries. Okay, any further discussion, committee? Well, like I said, I appreciate the good work of water development and trying to begin to address this issue. I think it's important that we have some information, some data as we continue these discussions. And I guess I'll just kind of share what's in my mind right now, share my thoughts. Maybe they're not complete thoughts, but I'll let you know where I'm at. It seems that, it would be really nice to have a good ballpark estimate before the legislative session coming up, which obviously means that the bill itself probably isn't going to do much if we're successful in getting that information. We don't know if that's going to be a successful effort or not. So I think at this point it's good to keep the bill alive, maybe not take final action on it right now today, but to move it forward for consideration at our November meeting and see how the situation develops with water development, both the commission and the select water committee, and just to demonstrate that we are serious as the ag committee, that we get this information and so we can really kind of wrap our minds around what is going to be required of us from a policy perspective moving forward. So just further discussion. Representative Blake.
So, Mr. Chairman, are we moving this forward as amended to the next meeting? Yeah, because we haven't voted on the bill. I just wonder if we would just have a motion to move it forward to the next meeting as amended, or I'm not sure where we are.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're considering the bill. We could always have a table or a motion to table it till the next meeting. Obviously different from that motion to table it indefinitely, which means we're not going to consider it at all. But a motion to, if that's what we want to do, somebody would move to table it until the next meeting as amended. And so Senator Moniz has hand up too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to your comments about the liability we have with infrastructure out there. I was wondering, Brandon, if you have any idea what the potential cost of the repair on LaPrel will be, because if I was downstream of that dam, I'd be a real concern. Do we have any numbers, or will we have any numbers by November on that, Brandon?
Mr. Chairman, if I were to provide a number, it would only be a guess. I believe it's safe to say it's in the tens of millions of dollars. There is some discussion on the timing of when we'll start seeing some results from the study going on, and that November timeframe being thrown around. I don't know where they sit. I haven't gotten an update recently on that, but they're progressing quickly on that, and so I hope to have something, but I can't promise that.
Well, I guess, Mr. Chairman and Brian, that's my point. To get information by the next legislative session on the total infrastructure and the liability throughout the state is going to be difficult at best, in my mind, to have by this legislative session in January. That's why I think this bill is somewhat premature. I think water development is proactive in the process of trying to gather this information. And hopefully by January, they'll have some feedback, but we're talking about a bill that you're going to debate at length, probably with that Public Records Act in it, quite extensively in January and February. So I'm questioning what we actually gain by this bill at this time, but that's my question. And we don't have enough information to even make a good decision on the liabilities we know we do have. And so that's my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Moniz. Okay, water development has their hand up, and I guess the question is in terms of the level or the detail of information available in this survey, how do you see that being different than the process you go through as you go through, level 1, 2, and 3 studies. I mean, is, you know, I get that. Yeah, that's a question I guess I have for water development. Is it's going to be like kind of a high level thing, or is it going to be more detailed? How detailed is it going to be?
Mr. Chairman, in comparison to a level 1 or 2 would be much higher level. If it pleases the committee, we do have a short presentation on the data that we've collected to date. And we have it queued up. If you would like to see a short presentation, we can certainly do that. Or we can just give a quick recap of what we have too, if you'd prefer to do it that way.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to know. Boy, committee, I think we should probably, we're considering a bill right now. It might be best to finish that business one way or the other, no matter what happens. We're interested in your information. So let's see, Representative Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think that we should at least proceed to vote on this. We've spent a great deal of time hashing it over and, working amendments and such. So I'd like to at least, one way or another, get a vote on this and then, see how things proceed from here.
Okay, so any further discussion? Kayla, you got something there?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to raise the question of proxy votes before voting got underway. We received, as you know, it's the chairman's discretion whether or not to accept proxy votes. As a courtesy to 2 of the committee members, I took their proxy votes, letting them know it's up to the committee chairman whether or not they would be accepted. So I just wanted to raise the issue for you so that if you would like the proxy votes, that I can provide those.
Okay, well, I guess we'll see how we try to dispose of the bill right now. If we table it till our next meeting, that won't be necessary. And gosh, that's a tough question because the bill has changed quite a bit. So thank you for bringing that up. For now, I guess we won't count them considering the changes to legislation. I'll just say that, not knowing what they are or aren't. I think that's only fair. And this will be a topic of a continued discussion. So, okay, so committee, any further discussion or further motions on this bill? So I would entertain a motion to table it until our next November meeting. Representative Clausen.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we table this till to our next meeting.
Okay, seconded by Senator Moniz. Okay, we'll just do a quick show of hands. All those in favor, raise your hand.
2 and Powell.
Okay, that's 5 ayes then. All those opposed? Okay, looks like 5 opposed. Chair votes aye. We'll just go ahead and kick it on to the next meeting and look and see what water development has for us at that point. So that being said, water development does have some information for us, it looks like, and love to see it. So,
Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to Mike Robertson.
Okay, I'll go ahead and explain some of the results that we have so far from the survey that was sent out. And all of this data is presented in Tableau. And so this is a software program that provides an opportunity to summarize and display data in a variety of ways. So what we'll start with here is a table. And so this table has an extent of the scope of the data that we received. So what we have on the left-hand side are the conveyances. And so these are pipelines, canals, ditches, and all of the can see kind of, okay, there you can see all the different categories that were included in the survey. So we asked the respondents to identify each of the various types of conveyances, and then the number of miles that were that they had it within their district. And so we asked them also to identify those by the capacity of the facility. So that would be either a large, medium, or small. And you can see across the top, we have large facilities would be those that had a greater than 200 CFS capacity. Medium were 100 to 200 cubic feet per second, and small would be 50 to just 100 CFS. And so there you can see across the table the number of miles that were identified for each of those categories. And in the lower right, there in blue, you can tell that we had information. We received information on just under 2,000 miles of conveyances across all of the surveys that we received. So in the lower part of this table, you can see we have structures. And so this is where the respondents told us about each individual structure type within their facility. So the categories here included diversion structures, check structures, main head gates, and various components there you can see on the left. And once again, they were divided into large, medium, and small categories. And so this one is a count of the individual structures that they put into these, that they gave us information about. And the total number of structures you can see in the lower right-hand corner there that we received information on was 852. And so now we can move to the next tab. So one of the things we asked information on was the age of the various features. And so on the left-hand side here, we have the conveyances, and the scale here looking at the miles that were reported were from 0 to 1,000. And the 4 categories of ages, we looked at less than 24 years, 24 to 49, 50 to 79, and greater than 80 years. And you can see right away that a large number of the conveyances, a large number, proportion of the miles of conveyances fell into the older categories. So they were greater than 50 years, and quite a few were greater than 80 years in age. And then to the right of this graph, you can also see the structures. Those were more evenly distributed. So we're looking at the count of the structures. And although they are pretty evenly distributed, there's still quite a few that were identified, over 200 total, that fell into the oldest category of greater than 80 years. Okay, next tab. Okay, now the other thing that we looked at with conveyances and structures was the condition. This was something that was reported for the surveyors. On the left-hand side of conveyances, there were 5 categories that they were asked to put their the conveyance into, ranging from very good to very poor. And you can see that quite a large percentage fell into the good and fair category. So even though the conveyances tended to be quite in the older categories from 50 years and up, there's still a good portion of them that are in a good and fair condition. But still a good 28% fell into poor and very poor. As for structures, a little different. We did see a larger proportion of the structures fall into the poor and very poor category, about 38% total on that side. Okay, next. Okay, now we're looking at, so the previous slide looked at all the structures and conveyances combined. Now we've divided out the condition by the capacity of the system. So you can see here looking at structures, that a large proportion of the larger structures fell into the poor and very poor category. Those are the orange and red. And so for large, we had 39% total fell into the poor and very poor category. A much larger percentage in the medium fell into fair. And then once again, with small, we did have quite a lot that were reported as being in poor condition. And if you go to the upper right, that will, Yeah, right there. There we go. And now we'll switch that over to conveyances. And once again, we're looking at condition as reported in the survey. And here we saw quite a lot of green, which would correspond to good category. So especially in the medium category, the medium capacity, most of more than 50% were reported as good. But if you look again at the largest conveyances, we had about 30% of those were reported as being either poor or very poor. And now we'll switch to another section of the survey, and this is in regards to reservoirs. So we asked on the survey to identify individual reservoirs within their system and also the size. So if you look to the left-hand side of this table, you'll see that the size of the reservoirs reported range from the largest at the top to the smallest of less than 100 acre-feet at the bottom. And then we have the categories that were reported from very good, good, fair, poor, and there were none that were reported in very poor condition. So those are excluded from this table. But right off the bat, you'll see that the two largest reservoirs that were reported were both identified as being in poor condition. And then if you look across the bottom with the totals, you'll see that the majority fell into fair and also the good category, but there were still a few identified as poor. Okay, next. And so the last section of the survey was identifying individual projects and their anticipated costs. So I think Director Gebhardt mentioned this earlier, but we talked about within the survey, there were 3 categories looking for the planning horizon, looking for those near-term projects, 0 to 5 years. Those are a little further out at 6 to 10 years, and those further on the horizon. And the majority of the total cost identified was, or the majority of the projects were identified in the near term. And the total costs that were explained or were identified was almost 60 million. And then the other component of this was to ask what proportion or what component of that was expected to be requested for state funding. And I'll point out here too that there were at least, I believe there were 5 surveys where projects were identified, but the cost was not included because there wasn't really good information to estimate those costs. So if anything, this is a bit of an underrepresentation of the total costs that might be expected within these horizons, at least from the surveys that were returned. And so as you'll see there, we have a total of almost $100 million identified from these surveys that we received. And then the final figure is another way of presenting the same information and just provided it with circles to recognize the relative proportion of the funding that was anticipated to be spent on these projects in the different horizons. And that's all I have for that presentation.
Okay, thank you. That's very informative. Committee, any questions? Senator Moniz. Oh, Senator Moniz, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now that 99 million, Brandon, represents, what did you say, 23% of the total questionnaires sent out?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Moniz, that is correct. It's 23% responded to the survey at this point.
So it's going to be considerably larger than that if you get them all back.
Mr. Chairman, I would anticipate that, yes.
Thank you.
All right, committee. I'm not seeing everybody up here, so if you have anybody have any further questions, go ahead and just start talking. Okay, well, beginning to, I think, get an idea of what the challenges we face are going to be. And you know, we're used to hearing about the deficit in, say, in highway infrastructure funding. I think we're going to have to start talking about the deficit that we have in irrigation infrastructure. And so, yeah, glad to see that we're at least beginning to get a ballpark assessment here. And I just want to commend Water Development for their good work on this so far, and look forward to more results. Of course, in a perfect world, that'd be, you know, before we're all together again in January. But we'll see what happens. So any further discussion on this topic with Water Development? Okay, going once, going twice. Looks like. So I'll double check. We don't have any public comment anywhere. And Powell, are you good?
Good and pal, there's no one here.
Hey, Representative Simpson, you still all by yourself there? Or?
And I'm scanning all the chairs and not a single chair wants to make a comment.
Good to know. All right, yeah, it's pretty lonely down here in Douglas too, so that's okay. So just want to double check with our staff, make sure nobody's waiting online that's supposed to be commenting.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, with that being said, if we could just get a quick summary of the committee's actions. I think we voted to get a few bill drafts going, and we tabled a bill till next meeting. But if we can just get a summary of what we did today from LSO, that'd be great.
Of course, Mr. Chairman. So what I have for the committee action is we'll put the final report from the Governor's Invasive Species Initiative on the November agenda. We have a bill draft to work with the Governor's office on those recommendations, as well as working with the committee and the chairman to get that draft where it needs to be for the next meeting. We also have on the agenda budget reductions for all agencies, as well as the tabled bill, and I skipped one over, taking on Senator Koss' bill that will now be the Joint Agriculture bill, relating to some of those hemp prohibitions.
Okay, that I think that covers my memory. If everybody else is good with that. Okay, looks like we're in good shape for today then. Appreciate everybody. Oh, Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, am I missing something? Did we go over Keith's dam policy information, privacy information?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we could. I think we kind of touched on it briefly, but you're correct. He probably has more detailed information than what we breezed over. So, Keith, are you still on?
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Kennedy is on and would like to speak, I certainly don't want to take that opportunity away from him. He had noted to Katie and I that his presentation was not very long, so I think it's possible that the committee did hear it.
Yeah, I apologize for the disorganized discussion there towards the end, folks. It probably could have been a little bit more clear for my part, but yeah, I think we've covered everything, and we'll probably have more discussion certainly as we with water development moving forward. But yeah, we'll wait till November for that. So, any further discussion for the good of the order here? Representative Blake.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to know, or maybe ask Katie, will there be another Zoom link for tomorrow's session or the same link that we used today?
Mr. Chairman, it's the same link from today.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. I'll see everybody at 8:30 tomorrow. Thank you.